As we come to the book of Job, we are actually moving into what is a new section of the Old Testament. If there is such a thing, this is a new part of the Old Testament. The Old Testament is broken into 4 different sections. The first 5 books are called the Pentateuch, or they're called the books of the law. The next 12 books make up the historic account of the dealings of God with the nation of Israel from the time of the Exodus all the way through the Babylonian captivity and the repatriation of Israel back into the Promised Land. And we just finished that, seeing how that all took place. And now we move into this third division. The third division of the Old Testament are called the books of poetry. They're poetry. And those make up Job and Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and a Song of Solomon. Oh, the last division is made up of the prophets, and then that's divided twice into what are minor prophets and major prophets. And the only difference between a minor and a major is not significance or importance, just the length of the book. And so all in all, when we look at the Old Testament, we recognize that there are 4 divisions or 4 sections within this particular presentation: the law, the historical books, poetry, and the prophets. However, calling it poetry does not necessarily make it familiar to our understanding of poetry. Unlike our English version of poetry, Hebrew poetry doesn't follow rhyme or rhythm. It doesn't necessarily look for patterns of paralleled words or rhyming words. What it looks for is parallels in thought or contrasts between thoughts. In our English poetry, we're used to hearing things that rhyme, like Mary had a little lamb. Her fleece was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, you guys finish it? Oh, and it rhymes. But see, Hebrew poetry is different. Hebrew poetry doesn't seek to rhyme that which is in the word or in a pattern, but more so to contrast that which is of the things of God in relationship to either parallelism or a specific contrast, such as the righteous shall flourish, but the wicked shall be cut off. A form of Hebrew poetry. Or it may be something where there's parallels, such as the way of the Lord is right, the way of the Lord is true, the way of the Lord is just. And while there's a pattern to that in how it's put together, it's certainly not meant to rhyme. So as we study this book, we have to be careful in calling it poetry that we don't try to make it rhyme. But instead, we look to what the writer presented to us in the means of contrast and parallel as it pertains to God and all of His works. Speaking of the writer of this book, we have no idea who it was. Even though it's named, it has the name of Job. There's some that say, well, the author might have been Moses, or it might have been Ezra, or it might have been Solomon, or it might have even been this Job character himself. We don't know for sure. It's quite possible that Job was the author. We'll talk a little bit about the potential of that as we move through it. But what we need to know and what we need to understand more than anything else is that the inspiration of God is by the means of God's Word coming about. So God is truly the author of this incredible book. We don't know either the time frame in which this took place. Or we're going to see right from the beginning that we also don't know where it was written. Oh, it's going to say that Job lived in the land of Uz. The problem is we don't know where Uz was. Oh, now there's some poetry for you, right? In fact, there's a lot that we don't know about the specifics of whom and when and where. But there's some clues that we can draw from. There's some things that we could make some reasonable assumptions of concerning these questions. And the clues such as the length of Job's life. It says that Job lived well over 140 years. We also see that his position was that of the priest of his family, and it appears that this was something that was given pre-law, pre-Exodus, so it would potentially take and date him to the time of the patriarchs. Oh, we also see within this that by the names of his friends, that very much so that there was the opportunity for him to be alive and a contemporary of, say Jacob. What it does mean is it means that Job could be literally the oldest recorded interaction between man and God. It could be the oldest book in the Bible, the oldest account. It could have come before anything else in relationship to the story and its account. Throughout this book, we're going to see all kinds of different themes. We're going to see a lot of different problems posed and problems resolved. We're going to see the nature and the character of man. And we're going to see a lot of different themes. And to place a central theme on the book is very difficult, although there are some that have tried. Amongst some of the greater Bible scholars, they've said, oh, well, the book of Job, the central theme is why the righteous suffer. We'll see that within this book. There's others say, no, the theme of Job is how God rebuked Satan through the example of his creation and how man is fashioned in his image. Or others have said that it's a book that reveals the true nature of man and his relationship to God, while others talk about, no, Job is all about patience. Has anybody in here not heard of the patience of Job? Oh, yeah, a lot of patience going to be exercised in it. There's opportunity for all these themes. There's a Bible commentator that I happen to have a real soft spot for, one of my favorites. It was a guy by the name of J. Vernon McGee. And J.V. had a take. He said that the central theme for him, as he saw it, was that man needs to repent no matter how good they are. And we're going to see that, and we're going to see all of these different things. We're going to see every one of these themes, and I believe even more. And so what I want to encourage you to do as we go through, first off, I want you to be studying not only in these times as we come together for service, but I want you to be looking at this and reading it and seeking God for yourself within and with the themes that He would present to you by informed study, by seeking the Holy Spirit. So you guys get to do some homework. Every time we break, I'm going to encourage you to continue to read ahead and to be prepared for the next time we come together. Regardless of what we don't know about the book of Job, there are a few things that we do. First, it is absolutely recognized as one of the oldest and one of the greatest works of literature in human history. Unparalleled. It's a gigantic and amazing drama that encompasses both heaven and earth. It gives us a view like nothing else that has been presented in relationship to the interactions not only of man and God, but what takes place in the heavenlies. Yet, the most amazing aspect of this book is that it's not a work of fiction. It's not a story. It's an account. It's an account. It's one that from numerous places within Scripture, from Ezekiel to the writings of Paul, Job is identified as a real person, as an individual who experienced these very things that we're going to see accounted to him. And so as we move into it, I encourage you to enjoy, to look, to study, and to see how God works in the lives of His saints. Chapter 1, verse 1 says, "There was a man in the land of Uz, a man whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil." Pretty amazing introduction. Of course, as we said, he was from the land of Uz, and we don't know where Uz was, but it might have been the dwelling place that was established by the son of Nahor, who was one of Abraham's brothers. Accounted to us in Genesis 22, we see the word or the name Huz with an H-U-S, which is also Uz in the language. And it says that he was the one that established the ancient city of Damascus. Now, Damascus, amongst all of the populated areas, cities of the world, is considered to be the most ancient of cities. So it's possible, I'm not even going to say likely, but it's possible that it was in that region, in that area. One thing I know for sure, Uz was somewhere in the Middle East. It also says that Job was blameless. It says that he was upright. And an amazing intro that, if not true, would have made, been very hard to be reconciled with the rest of the book. It says that he feared God and he shunned evil. And guys, understand, what this doesn't say is it doesn't say that Job was sinless, but it does say that he was in good standing with God. It means that Job was blameless in the sense of having no unrepented sin. There was nothing that stood between him and his relationship with God. There was nothing that was unatoned for in Job's life, especially through the process of sacrifice, which we will see was one of Job's practices. And it's important that we understand that Job was blameless before God and before man as we proceed, because it's going to bring up the major considerations of this entire book and set the stage for the interactions between God, between Job, and between Satan. The concept of being blameless, well, I don't know about you, but that's something that's real hard for me to understand. I have never been blameless of anything in my life. I mean, even when I didn't do it, I wasn't blameless. I mean, I participated in it somehow. I was always the one that was getting other people to do things wrong, so I was the sponsor of the event, but not necessarily the perpetrator. It's hard, but it's something that we should be able to draw complete comfort from when we look at it, because as Job was blameless through sacrifice, we too, as believers by faith in Jesus Christ, have literally been made blameless before the Father. Oh, again, not because of what we've done, but because of what Jesus has done. There's another aspect of being blameless, though, that will come to bear in this account of Job, because, see, not only was Job covered by sacrifice, but he was also covered by the manner in which he lived. He lived in a fashion of honoring God. He was not only blameless as far as sin with God, but he was also blameless in the eyes of those that knew him, his family, his wife, his friends. And even though he will be tested immensely by those around him, we'll see that there was no fault found in Job. It says in verse 2 that he had 7 sons and 3 daughters that were born to him. His also possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Along with being a godly man, Job was also very blessed. He was blessed with a big family. He had 7 sons. Oh, sons were a good thing. And it goes as far as saying that he even saw his daughters as a blessing, because they're mentioned here. He had 10 kids. He had a great household, many riches. He had a mess of camels. 3,000. Did we tell you that we were offered camels for one of our daughters over in Israel? Yeah. Was it 500 or 300? 300 camels? Yeah. I think the guy was serious, too. He offered us 300 camels for Christine, and I couldn't get on the internet to find out what camels were trading for on eBay at the time, so. Wasn't enough. But this background serves to establish and set the stage for the way that this drama is going to unfold. We need to have this understanding of just how prosperous, just how good life was for Job. It says, and his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of all of them. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. And thus Job did regularly. Now, not completely sure how this works, but it would be very clear that his sons had a regular scheduled party and feast calendar. It says that they would get together on their appointed days. Now, some have said, oh, well, maybe that was their birthday, but it says that basically they were in this continual state of literally, hey, where's the party at this week? And they would take and spread it around to the point that it was in a matter of inviting their sisters and inviting everybody along. And these guys lived in a lap of luxury, having parties and feasts all the time, to the degree that, well, they obviously were very, very close as a family. But yet we get a really good insight into the character of Job, his godly character, in that he was thankful for all that he had, and his kids lived very, very well, but he was also concerned about their position with God. Concerned that they might, in some way or another, have sinned against God. It doesn't say Job knew that his kids were a bunch of heathen partiers, and he was always praying for them and making sacrifices for his kids. It doesn't say that. It says, though, but on the chance on the chance that they might have done something. They may have sinned against God in their hearts, even unknowingly, that Job was willing to intercede and continually make sacrifices on behalf of his family. In all, we get this great picture of who Job was as a devout, devoted servant of God and being a man of great integrity and character. So this is Job. This is who he is. Life is good. 10 kids, great riches. Every one of his kids obviously living in their own place and being able to live in the lap of luxury. Everything is good. And now the scene switches. The scene switches after painting and giving us the understanding of Job. It now goes to the throne of God. And one of the things that we have to understand is that we are going to be let in on what's happening between these parallel locations, between heaven and between earth. We're going to see what's happening in Job's life, and we're also going to see what's happening in the heavenlies. But hold on to the understanding that Job didn't get that information. Job wasn't allowed in on what was going on. And that's going to be important as we go through this study and we realize the things that are coming against Job are doing so from the blind side. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you ever gone through something in your life that was really, really difficult, and the Lord brought you through it, and you got through on the other side, and you were able to look back and go, wow, I see what God was doing, and I was comforted through that. That was great. But I wish He would have let me know that that's what was going on. I mean, have you ever had that thing? If I would have just known that that's what God was doing, I wouldn't have had so much stress. I wouldn't have had so much anxiety. Maybe I wouldn't have misbehaved and struggled and fought against what it was that He was trying to accomplish. If God would just come down and say, hey, this is what's going to happen, then it'd be much easier for us to get with the program, wouldn't it? No. Now, in verse 6. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came along with them. And the Lord said to Satan, where do you come from? So Satan answered and said, oh, from going to and fro on the earth and walking back and forth on it. This is pretty amazing. First off, we need to deal with the term sons of God and understand that in the Old Testament that this is used to describe angelic beings. This is not in any way, shape, or form suggesting that God has multiple or many sons, as has been misinterpreted by some of the cults. It's not what it means. It's out of context to take it to that place. So these are created angelic beings. These are angels, and amongst them, Satan. Amongst the created beings is Satan. Why? Because he's a created being. You see, for some reason or another, people have got this idea that somehow Satan and God are like equals, and they're battling for the hearts and the souls of men, and there's this good versus evil, and they're kind of equally matched. Guys, understand, that is not how it works. It's not how any of this works. It's not the way that it happens within the kingdom of God. Satan was a fallen angel. If he is to be on par or equal with anyone, it would be another angel such as maybe Michael or Gabriel. Says he was pretty. Says he was good looking. Says he was a musician. You got to watch out for good looking, pretty musicians. Because they wind up from time to time having an ego problem, and that was his problem. Actually, he had an eye problem. He wanted everything for himself. But it's interesting because it's something that we need to understand, that Satan only has the authority that God allows him to have. Satan is only allowed to do what he is permitted to do, and there's never an opportunity that he will give or be given the opportunity to overrule God. It doesn't happen. It would appear that this reporting of the angelic beings is somewhat of a regular event. And I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, God would call them and they would come into account and they would give a report, and he would probably give them their marching orders for the next week or whatever it was. But there was this normal account, and this account included, I believe by requirement, the presence of Satan. See, Satan still was accountable to God. He's still under God's control. And we see also something that's interesting is Satan not only has access to the throne room of God, but he also here has free roam and free range of the entire earth. Where have you been? Oh, just walking here and there. on earth, back and forth, up and down, in and out, hanging out. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? This also I find to be extremely interesting because it would appear that God is kind of showing off Job. I mean, it's obvious that God is proud of Job. He's almost to the point of actually bragging about Job's character. And while I don't pretend to know how God would do this, I find great comfort in knowing that there is the opportunity for God to be pleased with how we would respond to him. And again, Job didn't know this. God didn't go down and tell Job, hey, attaboy, man, you're doing great. This is good. As a matter of fact, I've been talking to Satan about you. I don't think that there's anyone that has ever had a father that didn't want their father's approval. And I think it's neat to think that there are times when God the Father himself would take pleasure in our position with and for him. God points out what I believe is very obvious in asking Satan if he has considered Job. I wish it wasn't true, but I know that Satan considers the saints of God all the time. He does. He considers us. He checks us out. In fact, the consideration comes in all kinds of form of undesired attention and attacks. Satan is considering us enough in order to be able to try to the best of his ability to make our lives miserable. One of the considerations he has is I believe that he is absolutely amazed at the difference between himself and the grandeur that he thinks he is, and yet knowing that he's fallen in comparison to the human being, the man that was created in the image of God that by faith has eternal salvation. I think that just really irks Satan. I think when he looks at us as Christians and he sees that we have got this position in Jesus Christ and that there is a victory in Christ that he is not a part of, that it really bothers him and he considers that. Well, I think he also considers and is amazed at how happy we can be. How it is even in what would be considered a miserable existence by many and by all standards. I think that he looks at the misery of his own soul and the fact that he has turned against the only one true and living God, knowing that his defeat is imminent, that he is not going to succeed, and yet can't stand that we can have a level of not only peace, but communion and fellowship and trust for all of eternity. I think it bothers him. I think he considers the fact that he needs to look for faults, that it comforts him to find fault in us. Oh, and I think that he considers all the time those that block his work because they're faithful warriors in prayer, interceding on behalf of God's people. I think it bothers him. I think he looks at every opportunity as to how he can harm us and how he can take and bring blame and guilt. God says there's none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. God himself validates what we saw in the very first part of the chapter. And as we move through this book, we're going to see that there will be different evaluations of Job. Job is going to evaluate himself. He's going to be judged by his wife and by his friends. But remember, this opening assessment from God, it's going to be important that we recall and that we remember and we know exactly how it was that Job was deemed blameless by God. See, Job did not do anything wrong. So Satan answered in verse 9, he said to the Lord, does Job fear for nothing? Fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, his household, and around all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. Revelation 12 and 20 says that Satan has a specific job description. His biggest job description is to be the accuser of the saints. To go in front of God and to cast dispersion on you and me. Satan loves to accuse us. And here he brings a very clear and a very straightforward accusation against Job. He says, hey, you want me to consider this Job guy? And I believe God was like, hey, yeah, he's a great fellow, man. Job is doing great down there. I love this guy. He's good. Job's got his act together. Satan comes to him and says, well, of course. He's doing a great job because you're taking care of him. Look at all the stuff that you're given. Of course he's going to be obedient. Of course he's going to praise you. Of course he's going to serve you, because look at all the stuff that you're providing for him. On the left and on the right, he's got a family, he's got great houses, he's got great wealth. See, Satan's accusation really wasn't against Job, it was against God. What he was saying was, you know what, God? The only reason that he worships you, the only reason that he's obedient is because you bribe him. It's the stuff you're giving him. And I think that there was a part of Satan's heart. I can't prove this. It's just what I read and what I think when I'm looking at it. I think Satan was almost like, and if you do the same with me, maybe I'd. Maybe. You see, there's jealousy there. He sees Job and he says, yeah, the only reason he's doing this is because of all the stuff you give him. Take it away from him. You remove that stuff, he will stand up and curse you to your face. So the Lord says to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person. This is interesting stuff. I mean, interesting and very puzzling, because here God is giving Satan permission to mess with Job in a very, very real way. And I really struggle sometimes with how it is that God would allow his children to be attacked. And in this case especially, because Job is doing everything right. I mean, Job is godly. He is blameless. He is upright. Even God has admitted so that there's not any fault in Job, and yet he's going to turn Satan loose and allow Job to suffer. First thing we need to see very clearly is that the suffering that is going to be perpetrated by Satan is only allowed and is limited by God's permission. Satan is not just given free rein. He's given limited permission based on the will of God. And secondly, we need to know that God is allowing this, and because he is allowing it, that there has to be a greater purpose. There has to be something that God is looking for in this. It's not just God playing some sort of heavenly game where him and Satan are using Job as a pawn and saying, oh yeah, let's just go see how much affliction he can endure and see where his cracking point is. In the end, God is going to be glorified, and the enemy is going to be shamed. Folks, we're all going to suffer hardship in this life. While we're promised eternity through faith in Jesus Christ, we're also promised that in this life, we're going to get messed with, that we're going to suffer. And it's important that we understand that suffering comes regardless of if we're doing good or not, that while we will suffer more when we're walking in disobedience, walking upright does not guarantee the absence of suffering. Continues, it says, and Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. This scene literally boggles my mind, and it answers less questions than it asks. That while right from the beginning we see the battle that's coming in this interaction between Satan that has been turned loose to go and afflict Job, but yet Job is not privileged to any of this. Again, he's about to be blindsided. The benefactor, well, it's you and me. You see, the benefactor of this are those that are reading this and seeing what's happening. And James talked about this in relationship to the perseverance of Job. And he talked about how not only was there perseverance, but there was an intended purpose of the Lord. And armed with the insight that we see here, we can see clearly what James was talking about. The significance also of the spiritual battle that ensues, that we face every day as our enemy, the devil, roams around as a roaring lion, looking whom he can consume. You see, the battle is real. This isn't a theory. This isn't a story. This is an account of the enemy being given license to go and afflict a righteous man. I can just see Satan smiling as he leaves the room. This is going to be so good. I am going to just rip this guy to shreds. But God has a much bigger plan. Spurgeon wrote, as good as Job was at the beginning of this book, he will be a better man at the end of it. He was better in character, humility, more blessed than before. Oh, foolish devil, you're piling up a pedestal on which God will set his servant Job, that he may be looked upon and wondered by all ages. Oh, how many saints have been comforted in their distress by the history of patience? How many have been saved from the jaw of the lion and from the paw of the bear by the dark experience of this patriarch of Uz? O arched fiend, how you are trapped in your own net. You have thrown a stone which has fallen on your own head. You've made a pit for Job, but have fallen into it yourself, and you have lost by your own craftiness. You see, although we may not see the reason, and so often when we look at suffering, when we look at affliction, when we look at things that people are going through and what God is allowing, we wonder sometimes, why in the world would God allow this to take place? How is it that He can allow this to happen? This person is so good, they're so faithful, they're so deserving of better. And yet we don't know what it is that God is doing. The fact that we are sitting here tonight, thousands and thousands and thousands of years after this event, reading this account with great expectation of knowing that God is going to speak to us and our hearts and our conditions and to strengthen us and to encourage us. When I said, how many of you are excited about the book of Job? You guys were all like, yeah. Wouldn't it have been cool if God would have told Job that? Job, this is going to be really, really bad, but then it's going to be really, really good. It's going to be really, really rough for a while, but there's going to be this again. Do you realize, Job, you don't know this, but thousands and thousands and thousands of years, there's going to be this little church in Dayton, Nevada, that's going to be reading your account of what happened to you, and they are going to get so blessed by all of this. I'm glad God doesn't tell me what He's doing with me. Although there's times I think I wish He would. But see, if He told me, then it would also come with the opportunity for me to try to talk Him out of it. It would come with the opportunity for me to try to exercise my will or fix it and make it better. God, I know this is your plan, but how about trying it my way? Now there was a day, verse 13, when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine with their oldest brother in their oldest brother's house, and a messenger came and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabeans raided them and took them away. And indeed they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone escaped to come and tell you. And while he was still speaking, another came and said, fire from God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to come and tell you. And while he was still speaking, another came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels, and took them all away. Yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to come and tell you. And yet while he was still speaking, another came and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house. And it fell on the young people, and they are all dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Satan has permission, and he wastes no time. Satan goes, and in a matter of a few hours, Job loses everything. His oxen, his servants, his sheep, his camels, and all of his children, all in what would appear to be almost the same event. However long it took those servants to come from where they were to where he was to bring the report, it's possible that this all happened instantaneously. It shows the true character and the nature of Satan. It shows that Satan is going to come and how devious and how evil he truly is. There's no mercy, there's no restraint in Satan. You know, sometimes, have you ever seen somebody do something really, really wrong and really, really evil, and you just, your heart and your mind couldn't wrap around how anyone could do such a thing? There's a part of us that doesn't want to believe that people can be truly evil. We almost fall into that idea that somehow, oh, well, there's good in everybody somewhere. If you look hard enough, if you look deep enough, even in the heart of the convicted murderer or the rapist, there's got to be some good in there, doesn't there? No. Not in relationship to God's standard. And there is certainly no restraint and no good in Satan. And guys, it's why it's so important that we don't give him any foothold. We don't give him any quarter. We don't give him any room. We don't give him the little or least amount of access into our lives, because whatever we give to him, he will capitalize and take opportunity to magnify and multiply for evil, not for good. And sometimes we think we can mess around. Or we can just do a little bit of stuff. Or we'll just go dance with the devil a little bit. There's no such thing. The enemy only has one mission: to destroy. To destroy. It says, then Job arose and he tore his robe and he shaved his head and he fell on the ground and he complained and moaned. No, he fell on the ground and he worshiped. Now the grief of Job in the mourning that he went through, the loss that he suffered, is really unparalleled in history. Not that there haven't been many that have suffered great loss, because the history of man is completely riddled with this aspect of human suffering and pain. But all that he had worked for, all that he had gained in his life, was suddenly and just tragically taken away. And not only was it taken away, but it was taken away in the midst of him being blameless. You know, sometimes when something wrong happens to us, when something bad, do you ever go to that place of thinking, yeah, I probably deserve that? Probably had that coming. Yeah, I used to hear that all the time with the guys in the penitentiary. It was great. They would talk about how they didn't deserve to be in the penitentiary for the crime that they were accused of. As a matter of fact, many of them said, you know what, I didn't even do that crime. But I really deserve to be here for all the other stuff that I did. And I think there's times when we look at that and we think, okay, there's a reason that for this calamity, there's a reason for this happening. And guys, we've already talked and we know if it's consequential, if it's the product of sin and it's a consequence of our sin, then yes. Job didn't have any sin. And yet, his first response, he mourns. It says he tore his robe. But then he falls down on his face and he begins to worship. He worshiped because he chose to worship. You see, Job had to make a choice at that particular point in time. And then he follows it up in verse 21 and he says, naked I came from my mother's womb and naked I shall return. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Wow. Job analyzes this situation, and in this amazing and godly way, he's got this understanding that the material aspects of the world, even up into and including that which he has been given in his own family, his own children, were all given to him by God. That they passed through the hand of God on the way to him. That every material thing that he had, every blessing that he received, he came into the world naked and he was going out the same way. Which is a way of saying that from the time I was born until this time, every single thing that I have in this life came from God. That's a right way to look at things. That's a right perspective. Oh, it may not be necessarily easy or realistic in relationship to how the world views and how even we view things. I mean, have you ever really contemplated how you got your stuff? Anybody in here got a lot of stuff? Oh, come on, there's more you than that. You got a lot of stuff. Yeah, you got a lot of stuff. Because God gave it to you. God gave it to you. And if it goes away, it goes back to the same hand in which it came. And this is what Job is declaring. He's declaring this incredible aspect of the struggle that goes on in the human heart and the human mind. And I believe that the reason that we struggle in relationship to the things that we have is somehow or another we try to place the value of our life in the things that we possess. Well, look at all this stuff. I must be valuable, even in our relationship with God. Oh, God really loves me. Look at all the stuff He's blessing me with. Which means that then if the blessings don't continue, that if God doesn't perform, that if I don't continue to live that lifestyle, if I can't have that car or the boat or the things or the job or the possessions and the rest of it, then God must be either falling down on the job or He quit loving me. Job says, no. My relationship with God has absolutely nothing to do. His worthiness to be praised and to be worshiped has nothing to do with the material realm. It has everything to do with who He is. And he's not wrong. And then it says, and in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. There's some that have tried to say, oh, well, because Job said God gave and God takes away, that he's blaming God for taking things. No. Job was not saying God was wrong in the things that he took, the things that he lost. And I'm going to say this, and I don't want to sound harsh. I don't want to sound like I'm judging the heart, because very often it's not what is intended. But I hear people talk about things and possessions and even people that have been taken from them. God took my mom. God took my dad. God took my child or my husband. He took them. And again, I think that it's because we don't have a proper understanding of who God is that causes us to think somehow in another that He shouldn't have done that. And I've seen hearts that are just crushed, and hearts that are broken because of this mindset that somehow or another that I had it and God took it away. And that's not what Job is saying. See, God receives. When it comes to people, when it comes to His saints especially, God receives them to a far better place. Oh, it may feel like they've been taken from us, but they haven't been taken. God gave them, and God received them back to Himself. Satan obviously wasn't happy, because he's somewhat dismayed over Job's reaction. I mean, rather than crushing Job and him cursing God, here Job is on his face worshiping. Rather than blaming God, he acknowledges that everything he had came from God and everything's in His control, and Job is going to continue to worship regardless of the things that he has. And so Satan wants to continue the attack. So in chapter 2 it starts, it says, there was a day when the sons of God came into the present themselves before the Lord. And Satan came along with them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, where do you come? From where? Satan answered the same way, from going back and forth, here and there, back and forward and back. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause? So Satan answered and said, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to his face, or to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he's in your hand, but spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and he struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took for himself a potsherd to which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of ashes. Once again, the scene opens up in heaven. Another coming together of the angelic report. And again, Satan shows up and he questions God. Satan comes in and he accuses Job. And he says, all right, yeah, Job did pretty good with the first one. But the reality is, he's only not cursing you because he's afraid of you. He's just looking out for his own skin. And this idea of skin for skin was an ancient bartering term that talked about this aspect of taking and favoring and trading one skin for another skin. And what this Satan is saying is he's saying the only reason that Job hasn't cursed you is to save his own skin. As hard as it is, there's a lot of truth in that. There's a lot of folks that will take and sell other people to save their own skin. Abraham did. Oh, you remember when he sold his wife to some degree, threw her under the bus and gave her up and lied in order to save his own skin? Oh, and then there's that Peter guy. Denied knowing Jesus Christ in order to save his own skin. Satan says, hey, attack Job personally in the body and watch what happens. And God gives him permission. And what was horrific, what was unfathomable, what was beyond belief, never say, it can't get any worse than this. And we don't know what the affliction was, but we know what the effect was. Painful, oozing boils from head to toe. So much so that in an effort to try to alleviate some of the discomfort, and I draw this picture of these literally big, oozing, gooey, globulent sores. Job sits down in the midst of ashes, and people go, well, what's the deal with the ashes? Well, you see, one of the things that they would do in those days in order to limit infection is they would burn everything around them and sit in the midst of it because it was purified. So chances are he was in the middle of a dump where things had been burned, where everything was just ash, and he's sitting in the middle of the ash, and he's got a broken piece of pottery, and he's scraping these boils. Not a pretty picture. His wife comes to him and says, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. Honey, thank you for your continued support. Now, I tell you what, I have heard some really, really hard teaching about Job's wife, about how it seemed that she was this hard, unsupported, cruel, and sharp-tongued woman that was berating Job for his faith. But guys, we can't overlook the fact that she had suffered the loss too. She lost her 10 kids. She lost all of her wealth. She lost her position, and now she's looking at her husband, and she's seeing him in such a condition that she doesn't even know if she's not going to lose him. And she says, why are you still holding on to your faith in a God that would allow this to happen to you? And see, what happened is that she was having a crisis of faith. She gave up. And even though Job is not at this particular point in time giving up, she is in this place of saying, you know what? You're trusting a God that's letting you down. I can't do it. Why don't you just give up on God and die? It would be easier than what we're going through. Death would be easier than what we're experiencing right now. It's amazing because Satan's plan didn't really have anything to do with Job's wife, did it? I mean, when God said consider Job and gave him permission to go and afflict Job, we didn't really even think, maybe didn't even see coming the idea that there were these other people that were involved in this affliction that had to live through it, that had to suffer with him. And now we see Job's wife, and she's collateral damage in this battle. And guys, I don't want to overlabor this, but I want to close on this point tonight, and I want you guys to think about this. When it comes to where Job is and what he's about to share with his wife, that there are going to be times in the relationship, especially between a husband and wife, where the enemy will come and attack, and it's the man's place to stand firm and not condemn his wife for her position and for her actions, but to understand that he has been granted and given the position of priest and protector and provider. You see, Job wasn't supposed to fold. We could have. We see it all the time. His wife did. Here's what he told her. We'll close on this tonight. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speak. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? And in all this, Job did not sin with his lips.